Hi everyone, today I wanted to go over my favorite way to structure an ASP.NET REST API. Now, this is my opinion, so if you disagree, feel free to destroy me in the comments. Or hey, if you know a better way or you can see some improvements, feel free to post those below as well. I'm always open to constructive feedback. Let's take a look at the solution and I'll walk you through it. All right, so here we have an application which I prepared for this video. It's called Homey. It's a home management API. And let's dive right into it. So we got three projects, well, actually two projects in one folder. Let's take a look at the shared folder first. In the shared folder, we have three files. Now, the README is not that important. That's something you're going to be able to look at in the GitHub repo, which you can access by looking in the description of the video. What's really important mostly is the directory.build.props, where I keep global properties for all the projects, as well as packages props, where I do my centrally managed package versioning. Now, in this tiny solution with just two projects, this is probably overkill, but it's a kind of a force of habit. Let's just put it that way. I like to have these two files everywhere I go. Now, if I only have one project in a solution, probably not going to do that, right? Doesn't make sense. But anytime you get more than one, I like to create these and add them to the solution. Next, let's take a look at homey.api. Now, this is where the magic happens. Magic. We start in program.cs. At the top, we have some Serilog action going on, try catching the launch code, and that's it. The magic really happens in these two lines, add all services and app.configure. So let's start with the DI container first. This class is essentially like the configure services method of the startup.cs of old. Remember those? Honestly, there's nothing wrong with startup.cs. Well, anyway, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. These methods just add and configure services in the DI container. We have the database, authentication, exception handling, background services, channels, and email. We also have API versioning, open API documentation, output cache, and of course, Serilog. Now here, Serilog is configured to write to console, but obviously you could add another sync if you wanted to. You can check out the individual code for each one of these in the repository linked below, but it looks something like this, like add database just adds a DB context. Exception handling adds an exception handler. Authentication sets up all the necessary authentication code. This is pretty straightforward. Feel free to, again, take a look at the repo if you're interested. All right, let's take a look at the app.configure. This is also fairly straightforward. Not much going on here. This is the middleware pipeline, right? It's pretty slim, pretty straightforward. All right, next, the common folder. Let's close these files up. Now, this folder is a bit unusual, I must admit. Usually for things like filters or extensions, I would have a NuGet package that I just import into all my projects. Now, if you're working at a company, there's probably a Artifactory or some other place where you're storing these NuGet packages. So like, for example, this claims principal extension, that could be a NuGet package, or this route handler builder validation extensions. That could also be in a NuGet package. There's no reason this code needs to be duplicated across multiple projects. But for purposes of this overview, and so you can check out the code in the repository later, I left it in here. The common folder is essentially where I toss in stuff that I would reuse multiple times in this project, or something that doesn't belong anywhere else, something like the global exception handler. I don't belong here! There are also filters and configuration, DTO, so this is just a plain class. So anything that doesn't fit anywhere else will go in the common folder. And again, like I mentioned earlier, some of these things I would extract into a NuGet package, which I would bring in into different projects. Next, let's take a look at modules, because this is really the most important part. So here is where the endpoints and everything related to endpoints lives. I have a single file where all the endpoints are bootstrapped. So if I need reference or I need to add another endpoint, there's just one place to go. If we look here at home endpoints, we're setting a prefix /homes and then mapping every endpoint individually. For example, at home, let's take a look inside. I call these endpoint definition files, or EDFs. Everything pertaining to this endpoint is here. The request object, including validation, as well as the response. And of course, the handler. This is the function where we do whatever we need to do with that request. Since this is a minimal API, we can inject things in the DI container. So we're injecting the app DB context here. We also get implicit model binding, as well as some things that the framework injects automatically for us, such as the claims principle. The code inside is essentially just adding a new entity and then saving it to the database. So nothing too complicated, just a simple CRUD action. In this case, the C of the CRUD. The homes, inventory, and pros folders contain all the endpoints in this application. Homes also contains rooms, because homes have rooms.
Really? Really?
But the other two folders, identity and email, are the two interesting ones. So let's take a look at identity first. These are the new and improved authentication endpoints, which Microsoft released in .NET 8, but with a few tweaks. Since the package isn't super customizable, I copied the code of GitHub and made the changes that I needed inside. So that is the custom identity API. Now let's look at email. There are a couple things here. First, the email sender. It is required by the authentication code we just looked at earlier. Essentially, in order to get a confirmation or password reset emails, the IEmail sender has to be implemented. That's this, the email sender. The more interesting bit here is that I'm not actually sending emails. I'm writing them to a channel, and that channel is using the iChannel interface, which you can see here. This is the email processor, which is reading the channel. So it's a background service. It is reading the channel, as you can see here, and it is sending the email. Now, I actually have hooked up SMTP here, but any real application will probably be using something like SendGrid or Resend to send emails. Nevertheless, offloading these functions to another thread to ensure there's no like third-party blocking your API call is pretty handy. All right, so that's modules. Email, homes, identity, inventory, pros. Again, please take a look at the repository. Everything will be available there.
It's all there, black and white, clear as crystal.
Last thing I want to look at is the data project. A bit of context first. So we're using Postgres and EF Core to store our data. This is relevant because I want to specifically split the migrations folder out into its own project along with the DTOs and the DB context. Now, if we were using something like, say, Redis stack to store our data, for example, I would probably just include the models folder back in the API project and have one project only. So all we got here is the DTOs that look like this. This is an inventory item. Here's a home. It's a straight up class, right? Nothing in here. And then we have the DB context. Now this is inside the DB context. This is where I define the DB sets and the constraints for individual columns. If you've done EF before, this must be making your eyes bleed, but essentially nothing controversial here, right? Just regular DB context.
It's easy and good.
Now, that's the project. This folder structure is by far my favorite of everything else I've done. And I've done DDD, MVC, vertical slices. Oh, actually, this is kind of vertical slicey-ish, right? Not exactly, but a little bit. And yes, I know it might not scale beyond a medium-sized project, but it's got everything you need to build basically 95% of REST APIs out there. If you don't mind having migrations in your main project and your DTOs, you could even move those over to simplify further. Okay, that's the API, but what about the front end? Say a Nuxt SPA. If that sounds interesting to you, tune in next time, because that's what we're going to be going over. Hope to see you then. Take care. Bye.